Thursday, everyone. It's so nice to see our friends and neighbors and a few new people that we haven't seen before tonight. And welcome to you. Quick housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself muted while we're going through the wines and the presentation, but do use the chat to ask us questions and we'll answer them online. And if you want to jump in and ask us in person, please just use the raise your hand button and we will call on you and unmute you. Because we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. And you know us, it's another beautiful day in the Napa Valley. We love that. And as you can see, they're out at the ranch. The clouds are starting to come in. There could be rain in our future. We continue to cross our fingers in this exceptionally dry season. I hope everyone has a glass of wine in their hands. Preferably one of ours and the one we're talking about tonight, but we'll forgive you if you didn't have access to it this evening. And as long as you're drinking something delicious, that's our plan. So I'm very excited to have the whole team here tonight. We've got Michael Garcia in the vineyard, Michael Scholes in the cellar, the amazing Chef Todd Kawachi in the kitchen, and then Brianne Hoover in the garden. So lots of fun things to learn about with this series. I know everyone enjoyed seeing Bri last fall when we were talking about the garden series. And I think this is the third year we've done My Wine, My Garden for the summertime. And hopefully everyone got their seed packets. If you bought your wine locally and you didn't get your seeds, shoot us a note. We'll send you your seeds because we got to get you started because we're doing Start Your Starters tonight, right? So exciting to be here. Let's jump over to Michael Garcia and find out what's gone on because it's been 2 weeks since we've seen you. What's been going on in the vineyard, Michael?
Yeah, so we have been pruning, like we've been talking about. We are very close to done with pruning, and the parcels that are remaining are our most frost susceptible parcels. And that is because we're coming up on frost season after bud break, where our vines will be susceptible to frost damage. So we've left the most susceptible for last.
Yes, that's a good point because that does slow them down from bud break. So you can get an extra week or so there by delaying pruning. So good to do in a year like this year. As I said, it's been really, really dry and we do a lot of different things for frost protection. And generally at Dollarhide, we use water, our captured rainwater for frost protection. But I know you've got a few other things going on this year for frost to try and make sure we don't have to use too much water in drought year number 2 in a row here. Want to tell us about that?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, it's a dry year, and given the lack of water, we are utilizing some new tools this year. So these are frost fans that we don't typically have to use, but we brought some in this year to be used in certain parcels where we will see frost susceptibility, and that'll be a new approach for us in addition to the water. So we'll have to use a two-pronged approach, both the air and the water for frost protection.
Awesome. Can you explain to everyone how the water helps us protect from frost? Because maybe not everyone's aware how we utilize that.
Yeah, so the sprinkler systems act as you would imagine as sprinklers throughout the vineyard. They wet down the vines, and when the temperature is below 32, which could potentially damage the green tissue on the young shoots, the water will start to freeze. And the act of freezing, that reaction releases a small amount of energy that actually keeps the ice encapsulating that green tissue right at 32 degrees. Now, if we were to have a very hard frost, say down below 20 degrees, then we might start to worry that amount of energy being released wouldn't be sufficient. But that's the mechanism that we rely on, and it gets us through.
Yeah, and that's a really cool way to protect against frost. But the fans are also quite effective, maybe not as effective depending on where they're located. And, Dollarhide, with all these undulating hills and variety of locations, it's hard to make sure we're in the right spot, right, for frost. So you guys are looking at that really closely, I'm sure. Do you want to explain how the fans work?
Yeah, the fans work by essentially stirring up the air. And so you'll have what's called an inversion layer, and your cold air will sink to the low spots on the ranch where the fans will be placed. And in theory, you will have a mass of air that's higher temperature above the fans. And so the fans simply act by stirring the cold air, pushing the cold air up and mixing it. And it'll get you a few degrees temperature raising depending on where you put them. So that's the discussion amongst the team right now. In that picture, you can see we have lots of different valleys and microclimates. So we've been scoping out our options and running through the scenarios of where to put the fans if the nights were to get cold.
So why don't you explain to everyone how we're measuring that temperature in all those different locations at the ranch, and how you know kind of when you're in trouble and you need to get out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, as I know you're going to see here pretty soon.
Yeah, we usually get an automated phone call that's based on these weather stations. So we have weather stations placed throughout the ranch. That webcam is located at one on top of a hill, on top of parcel 10. And we also have weather stations strategically placed in low areas on the ranch as well. And so this dashboard comes up that you can see with all of our data, and we can track the temperature. And we find it useful to look at a graph of the temperature that's reading every 15 minutes so we can see how rapidly the temperature is dropping and anticipate if we need to start turning on sprinklers, running fans in this case. But having the data come into a web-based portal that you can pick up your phone and get an alarm keeps us on track.
Yeah, it's really cool. One of the things I was thinking about, because it's been so dry, our cover crop isn't as high up as it typically would be this time of year. It's gotten a little bit later start. So how are we with the height of that cover crop affecting where the inversion layer is going to be?
Yeah, that's a good point. Depending on how big the inversion layer is, the 2 or 3 feet of cover crop growth can make a big difference in where that cold air mass sits. A lot of times it'll sit right on top of the cover crop and put the coldest air right in the zone of these green shoots that are coming out. So by mowing the cover crop or tilling it, we can kind of buy ourselves a couple feet of space, and sometimes that's all the difference we need to protect these shoots from frost.
Yeah, and there's a question: do the fans use the natural air temp, or are they sending heated air?
No heated air. I do imagine the engines put off some heat, but I don't think that's a significant part of it. So yeah, we're just trying to stir the natural air mass and get the cold air that's settled to be rotated with the warmer air above.
Any thoughts on when we're going to see bud break at this point, and which varietals?
Yeah, we've been talking about it a lot, and we'll usually see Sauvignon Blanc and our Muscat is pretty early. We'll see them right at the end of March, maybe the last week of March. This year, I think it might be a little bit earlier. We've seen quite warm temperatures through January and February, and the ground is drying out. So that's also a signal that the dry soil that will get the plants to push. So I would say 2 weeks from now, we might start seeing buds start to go.
And what about new wildflowers? We saw some Indian paintbrush and some irises starting to come up there, wild irises. What do you got?
Yeah, with the warm weather, we are seeing a lot. So very interesting stuff. This is actually a plant called toxicodendron that you're seeing, and it's toxic to livestock, hence the name. But really cool bulbs and lilies like this that we're seeing in the burn scar areas. So this is up on the hillside of the property. It's another picture of the toxicodendron, and despite the name, it's a really pretty flower. This one's called the checker lily, and so that's a really pretty flower we'll see in the same sort of area.
Well, I love to see these beautiful flowers coming up where we just had all that awful burn. It just gives you really great hope for 2021. It just makes me happy to see them. So thanks for taking some pictures this morning for us to see. It's really, really lovely. A little loop in there. Great photos. Well, thanks for the update, Michael. Let's jump over to Michael Scholes and talk about this wine, because this is sort of a fun wine that Michael, you and I kind of created when you came back from your sabbatical in 2009. I mean, we talk about it being Brooks wine a lot because she was the mistress, shall we say, of the final blend. But before you came back to St. Supéry in 2009, when you came back to St. Supéry in 2009, we talked a lot about strategy, like looking forward. And it's sort of hard to believe that was 12 years ago. That we were having those conversations and saying, what do we want to do for the property and for the wines, and what's our future for St. Supéry, and really looking at those vineyards and how important those vineyards are to us, and the reflection and difference between our two vineyards. And we had this sort of concept that we wanted to reflect what was the best blend from each of our vineyards, and what was the best blend of the two properties, the Red Bordeaux varietal blend. And we just had the ALU with most of you recently, and that's the best of our two properties and kind of a reflection of the vintage. Whereas this Dollarhide Elevation is really a reflection of the best blend from this property. So do you want to talk a little bit about how we kind of came up with this style, your thoughts on the varietals in it?
Sure. So as you say, we started working with blends quite a while ago, back in 1994, which is when Michel Rolland came on board. He came on board actually to work on the ALU originally with the vintage of 94. And that was sort of fun. But as you said, Emma, that sort of crossed the boundaries of both of our estate properties. So that wine does use both properties. But Elevation is a very cool blend, and that is just about Dollarhide. And so we've talked a lot about the old vines at the ranch, but we have a lot of really fantastic vineyards that aren't the oldest vines. The oldest vines, of course, get allocated generally to the Dollarhide Cabernet because it's unique. They're unique. But we also have vineyards that are 15 to 20 years of age, which are quite mature vineyards and great Cabernet, and actually possess some of the more recent fashionable French clones and so forth. So pretty fun stuff. And so, we decided to really focus this wine on some of those vineyards that are also hillside vineyards. And we made some really nice wines from that. But, of course, we also grow Malbec on the property. And one thing about the Dollarhide Ranch is that it's a mountain estate. And so with those mountain estates, you create wines that tend to be quite structured. You feel the structure, you feel the tannin, and it's present. So we also grow some Malbec there. Now, Malbec's quite different than Cabernet. It's a much more, while it's very dark, and it's very, very dense sort of fruit aromatics and what have you, it's actually quite soft on the palate in our situation, because Malbec does change around the world. So by taking that excellent Cabernet from those vineyards and creating that mountain wine, we're able to take a little bit of the Malbec and really sort of fine the profile out a little. Have a Cabernet that's powerful, dense and scented with great entry and completion, but also round it with that Malbec. And it really was a great contributor to the blend. So that's how Elevation came about.
I'm always sort of fascinated about the Malbec in that, we drop fruit so many times on this property. We're always throwing fruit on the ground with the Malbec to get the flavor profile you want. And then you think how, in Bordeaux, it really doesn't set in that quantity like we have here in our Mediterranean climate compared to their maritime climate. Do you want to talk about that extra handwork that you all do in order to get that intensity and the flavor you're looking for?
Yes, the Malbec, this wine's a blend it's a Cabernet Sauvignon, but it has a bit of Malbec blended in, and they're the two varietals we use for this particular identity. Cabernet Sauvignon and Malbec as vines and as bunches of grapes are very, very different from each other. And so therefore you manage them a little bit differently. Cabernet, for example, is typically a fruit that has a very loose bunch and smaller berries, whereas Malbec is a much larger bunch with bigger berries and a little bit tighter and not compact, but a little more compact. And so therefore, the bigger berries have more juice in them. There's more because the bunches are bigger. The vine carries more load, and what we've realised is that our Malbec can be quite soft and gentle, but we want to encourage density, encourage texture, encourage really outstanding quality of tannin in all of our fruit, inclusive of the Malbec. But to achieve it in the Malbec, we have to cut some of that fruit off because those bunches are so big and those berries are so big. So when we cluster thin many varietals, even Cabernet, for example, and it's dependent on a year about how much and what have you. But with Malbec, we tend to get very aggressive on our thinning. So we cut a lot of fruit off. In fact, sometimes I've seen up to 40% of the fruit dropped on the ground, and all in an effort to make a better wine. And you make a better wine, we'll make a better blend.
I know. I always walk by and people tease me because I'm an accountant that I must be thinking that that's money on the ground. But I've been in the wine business long enough to know that means there's quality on the vine. And it's okay to throw that fruit on the ground because what we're after is the quality. And this wine, the 16 vintage, I think is a really great vintage. I feel like the 15s we've been drinking a lot of lately. They're got great density, but they're also a little kind of kinder. I feel like there's some more structure in the 16s. I kind of want to age my 16s maybe a little bit longer. What are your thoughts on the vintage?
16 is a really terrific red wine season. It created wines that have great textural structure. So there's a lot of density in the wines. It's a lot of high quality tannin. So tannins are really nice tannin. Even though the wine's really dense, it just finishes exceptionally well. But it's got a lot of things going on when it crosses the palate. So great entry, great finish, and great presence through the centre of the palate. This particular wine, I think, presents aromatics of very dark fruit, quite typical of our Cabernet out there, but even enhanced by that little bit of Malbec we put in, because that Malbec brings a real dark fruit too. It actually brings a dark fruit, but also with a hint of boysenberry, which you can see a little of in the aromatic. But the 16 was a really, really good vintage. And also, of course, created that dark blackberry fruit. We've got a bit of espresso in the aromatic. We have just a hint of that dark chocolate as well. And that sort of, those flavours follow through onto the palate quite well. And you see a little bit of the oak presence from what we've done there as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, Linda's giving me a hard time that I told her to save it now. We have more at the winery, don't worry. You could always stock up, particularly before we hit the summer shipping slowdown. So Michael, thoughts on the winemaking on this, on how it's a little bit different, what you're doing to achieve this delicious wine?
Certainly. Well, as of course, we spend a lot of time through the season growing these grapes because that's the core, the heart and the soul of the wine that we make in any time. The better job we do in the vineyard, the better the wine will always be. But we still have to guide this wine through its processes to get to its final resting place in the bottle. And so we, of course, make our harvest decisions based on a little science, but also a lot of just walking vineyards and tasting grapes, look for correct flavour and structure and tannin ripeness, very important. And then we of course go and harvest at night. We harvest at night because during the harvest we typically have hot days and our nights are very cold. So we want to capture the fruit when it's cold because it maintains the integrity of the berries all the way through to the winery. And so that's important. Upon receipt of the winery, we of course sort our fruit, and you see that happening on the screen right now, where we receive the clusters. We sort the clusters to ensure there's nothing inferior in there. Then we destem them, dropping just single berries onto the table you see in the screen. And that table presents it to our optical sorter. Our optical sorter is unique in the fact that it will recognise anything we don't want. So while we do an enormous selection in the vineyard, you can't capture everything. So this is another step to enhance one more time. And so we tell the optical sorter that if it sees anything we prefer not to have, to eliminate it. So it does. It looks for those items. And by default to that, all the excellent berries, it doesn't touch it. It just lets it follow through the machine, and it gets captured in our little macro bin there. And that macro bin is then an enhanced high-quality group of fruit and what have you. That then gets delivered, of course, to our fermenters. And a lot of this wine goes into open-top small vat fermentation. where we do a little bit of old world work like punch down, maceration, and what have you. And we also, and you see those on the screen here right now, those tanks can be heated, they can be chilled. And as you go through vinification, it's important to be able to do those two processes at various times. And while we do that, we also put some into barrels and do some barrel fermentation. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Michael, because we were using indigenous yeast with the red wines, is it particularly important to have the heating and cooling on the tanks? Because that was something that that we added as part of our upgrades to the winery starting in 2009.
Yeah, it is. There's during our vinification, there's times where we want our fruit chilled. There's times when we want our fruit heated. Fermentation will generate heat on its own. So heat aids extraction. Cooling will slow fermentation down. So they're both very important at various stages. We, of course, don't want it to be too cold. That's during that fermentation process. Equally, we don't want to get too hot. And of course, as fermentation creates heat, we've got to be careful it doesn't get too hot, but heat is a good thing. So that's important, yes.
So, so this wine, you said that we do have a little of that whole berry barrel fermentation in it. About how much is whole berry barrel?
Of the whole berry fermentation, this wine is probably about 10%. But we do some other barrel fermentation techniques, which actually makes up nearly the total fermentation concept to make up almost half the blend.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's really impressive. I mean, that's a lot of work to do that whole berry barrel fermentation and a lot of manual labor. So it's good that it keeps you guys at fit spinning those heavy barrels on the wheels help. But I have seen some extra effort going into flipping those around during harvest and keeping them going. So that's taking about 4, 6, 8 weeks there? Yeah.
So the fermentation in the barrels, when you put the whole berries in the barrels, that tends to be a slow fermentation, so it takes quite a while. And there's a lot of work that goes into that for a very small amount of wine. So, but yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah,
makes a unique wine.
It does. I mean, I remember our trip to Saint-Emilion in 2016 when we did some of those barrel trials with that. It really impressed upon me that mid-palate density that you get from that, which is really nice, combined with this mid-palate sort of juiciness that we're getting from the Malbec. Wine's delicious.
Yeah, the wine is drinking really, really well.
I think critics liked it too, so you must be doing okay.
Yeah, we hope.
We hope. Well, thanks for the update, Michael. Let's hop over to Bree and see what she's got for us in the garden. As I said, if you did not get your seed packets, just shoot us a note. We'll get them in the mail to you, so you can get started right away, or just go to our St. Supéry/garden and enter it there. So Bree, we're doing starters. You're getting us ready. We're getting our gardens ready, our engines ready. Tell us what we should be doing right now.
Yeah, so this is a great time to get your starters going for your spring garden. You still have some time before that last frost. So I'm standing here next to our little seed cart with some of our starters I have for our spring garden. So I'd love to first show you what I have going on in here, and then I'll explain a little bit more about what you should do. So first, let me show you here. I do have a little bit of an advanced setup here with the light cart, but I want to start by saying that you do not need a setup like this to do your start. So real quick, I do want to show off our little tomato seedlings. They've been planted here for about a little over 3 weeks, so they're just starting to get their first set of true leaves. Are some of our peppers here, so they're nice and happy. And then down below, I have a few different things going on. So there's some eggplants, tomatillos, a bunch of different herbs, and I'll zoom in here. You can see some basil. So this one here is Genovese basil, and I want to say that basil doesn't just taste great with tomatoes, it also grows very well. So I'm planning on planting that basil there with our tomatoes, because they are a great companion plant, because the basil with a strong scent does repel certain pests like hornworms and other insects. So if you are going to do tomatoes, I encourage you to also do basil. So let me put this back here.
Yeah, it's a really great combination. It's not just a great flavor combination, but it's a great natural integrated pest management tool to plant like that.
That's right. And we will dive into that, I know, in some of the later weeks. So anyways, to do your own starts at home, like I said, you do not need an indoor grow cart or anything complicated like this. All you really need is some kind of container to grow them in, like any kind of bowls or cups, or if you have saved any kind of container from buying plants from a nursery. I also have these biodegradable cups that are great because you can plant them right in here and then put this directly in the ground, and it won't disturb your roots or anything. It just breaks down. You also will just need some seed starting soil. I'll show you some here. It is a little different than regular potting soil. I'll show you. So it's made up of peat moss, perlite, and vermiculite. So it's very lightweight. It holds moisture very well. And it doesn't actually have any nutritional value to it because the seeds provide enough of that until those seedlings are ready to go into the ground. So, and then lastly, you just need some kind of light source. So if you don't want to do an indoor light system, you can just put them in a south-facing window that should get plenty of light, and then water. So, so it's really quite simple.
And so if we're kind of far north, though, how long do we really kind of want light on those seeds a day? Do we doing some extra lamps at all with that? Yeah. So with our indoor grow lights, I do like to put them on for about 14 to 16 hours a day to get them enough to grow nice and strong. I do use a timer for ours here. So that's a nice way, because otherwise you might forget or you're not home to turn them off and on. So that would be ideal. So that's why I mentioned the south-facing window. It does get more sun than other windows in the home. Okay, super. And so then you can just supplement that with a light. Robert Hayes Peterson is asking if those biodegradable cups are available at Lowe's or other, hardware stores.
Yeah, so I have seen them at different nurseries. I've seen them online, even on Amazon. You can get them in a couple of days. So yeah, I've seen them anywhere that has like a big plant department. I've seen them in like the potting section. So they're really great to have. I'm actually going to transplant our starts into them to get a little bit bigger and then put them right into the ground.
Awesome. Todd's asking, can you recommend other plants that will ward off evil pests?
Yeah, so there are a few. I can mention a couple right now. So like cosmos, for example, are great with the corn earworm. And yeah, so those are great. I know there's a lot of other different herbs. So anything with sometimes really strong smells can repel that. I use society garlic in our garden too, because the one plant that the gophers don't like to touch. So things like that work really well.
Yeah, I think marigolds are good too for the fall season planting. And, anything that if it's pretty or delicious as well is kind of a double bonus in that regard, or good for bees or any other sort of butterflies and so forth. So you've got your sort of seeds started there. I don't know if I'm going to be together enough to get my trays and everything going. Can you tell me a little bit about how perhaps we novice gardeners can get started?
Yeah, so of course. So like I was saying, if you are going to do your starts indoors, you can start with anything, like I said, from a tray. So I'm using these trays here. You don't need this at home setting unless you choose to. So basically what you would do is, if you take your cup, I'm going to add some of my potting soil in. And so once you put the soil in, I give it a good tap on my hand. And then I want to fill it to about the planting level that I'm going to put my seed in. Or you can even just use your finger to put a hole. So if I'm going to do, say, squash, I'll show you here. So I have some squash seeds. I'm going to put, maybe 2 or 3 in, the cup. here you can see, or in the cells, and that way, and then I fill it to the top, and then like that, and just pour some water on it, and that's pretty much all you need to do. Just put it in the light. Make sure you're watering them regularly, at least once a day. I would check in sometimes, depending on the size of the cell or the planter that you're using. The moisture levels go down, so I would check in on that. And once they start to grow, after a couple of weeks or so, if you do get more than one seed that germinates, it's important to thin them out. So I like to do 2 or 3 seeds, so that way if one of them doesn't grow, I will have another one that will, and then I will thin it down to the strongest one. So I might remove one of them in 1 week, and then the following week I'll select the strongest one again, and then plant them in the garden after the last frost.
So Darwin lives here in the garden. I can see that. Only the strong survive. All right. And that's kind of how it is in our garden at home, but it's usually from neglect, not from horticultural selection. So what other methods? Can we just plant it straight in the ground?
Yes, absolutely. So like with the carrots, for example, I mean, you can plant those now. It's not too cold, but with the squash and the cucumber, you're going to want to wait till after that last frost. And so I'm going to demonstrate that as well. But here's a picture of a galvanized steel planter. We have a few of these at the winery. These are wonderful if you don't have a lot of space to garden, if you don't feel like building your own raised bed. And the added bonus for using something like this is it helps with our gopher control. It helps us with soil control. And also it's a great way to be able to cover your plants. Like if they're sensitive to frost and you have something, that's a perennial, you can easily cover that up. So yes, those are great. So here, so I'm have my soil ready to go. So whether it's in the container or in the ground, I'm showing you here, these are some carrot seeds. So what I like to do with my carrot seeds or any kind of really small seeds, which is what's really difficult to just pick one up and plant at a time, I like to use the trowel or my hand, and I like to create a small trench about the depth that I'm going to plant. So in this case, it's about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. And then I pinch a little bit of the seeds in my fingers, and I'll try to drop, 1 or 2 every inch or so, all the way down the line. And then I'm going to just very gently cover that soil back over them. I don't want to do it too hard because I don't want to push them in further or compact them too much.
Oh, good point.
And with larger seeds like the squash and the cucumber that need more space, they're a little easier to handle. I'll just take my finger and then I'll poke it in the soil about the depth that I want to plant them. So for those, it's going to be about 1/2 inch to 1 inch. So I just poke them. I'm going to plant them a little bit closer than I would because I want to be able to thin them out. And so in this case, I'm going to also lightly cover them in soil. I put about 1 or 2 seeds in a hole and then just thin them out. And then when they do start to grow, they will need 2 to 3 feet of space for the squash and maybe about 1 foot of space for the cucumbers. So just thin them out and give them enough space, and then plenty of water and they will grow.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited about the blends that you put together in the seed packs. You've got all my favorite carrots and cucumbers and squashes. So I'm hoping that I can get myself together and get started a little earlier this year with my seeds. Is there anything else I should have asked you about planting, about what we should be doing out there? Other vegetables we should get started now?
Yeah, now is also a great time. You can plant your radish, beets, and turnips into the ground now. You can even still get some peas in. So it's a great time for that if you have the space, even in a small pot or something. They don't take up a lot of room.
So there's a question here about using the pulp packaging from your wine club shipment to start your seeds. Is that a viable resource?
You said the pulp packaging?
Yeah, the little containers.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm familiar with those, but I mean, if they are of a decent size and they're not going to break down while you are actually waiting for them to grow, I don't see why not. You can get pretty creative on the things that you can use.
Yeah,
so.
They are they are sort of fabulous. Anything that we should know about, like, I know radishes, can we plant the radishes and beets? We can go straight in the ground right now too.
Yes, you can. And this area too, they like to grow. They seem to grow really well with a little bit cooler weather before it starts to get really hot. So it's a great time to do your spring radishes. So those are a little bit different than winter radishes, which are like the daikon, slightly larger varieties. So the spring varieties are things like the French breakfast, or you have the cherry bell, like the small, like really crisp, crunchy. So here's some pictures here of some French breakfast.
I love that.
And they only take about, maybe 21 days to a month. Those are icicle. Those are a lot of fun too. They look sort of like carrots. So there's all different kinds of colors and varieties to pick from. And here's some of our French breakfast. This is a great picture I got down in the soil there to get that one. So
that looks pretty darn awesome. And I do think beets are something that I fell in love with in Napa Valley. They are definitely not your grandmother's beets when you grow them yourself. There's so many delicious things. Chef Todd has recipes for them. So tips on where we're located, on what we should be doing now, any extra tips?
Yeah, so depending on where you live, so if you're in like the cooler climate, if you see in this zone here, if you live in the blue and purple zones, you definitely want to probably start everything that you can from in the start, or everything that needs a warm growing season. So like the cucumbers and squash, not even just the nightshades, I would do those all inside because you do have a shorter growing season. In the green region, you're probably fine to plant those directly in the ground in May, and then everything else that's warmer in like the orange, red, kind of brown region, you're good to go after that last frost. For us, it's around mid-April, so I would pay attention to your last frost. And then, of course, we should all be starting our nightshades, like tomatoes and peppers, indoors now, because we want to, extend our growing season and enjoy those vegetables all season long.
Yeah, I do love the planter box that you were showing, because if you risk it and you're a little early, they're super easy to cover up with an old sheet or painting drop cloth to make sure if you are getting that sudden frost. Susan says in Seattle, they always have to plant after Mother's Day. Lynn would like some clarification on the maturity for the radishes. Is it 3 to 4 weeks? Is that correct?
Yes, that's about right. Depending on the variety, if you can look at the pack.
Oh, I lost your signal there. I'll take that as it. I'll take that.
Some of them are.
I lost you for a second there, Bree. Can you give us that again, please?
Yeah, so I was saying yes, about 3 to 4 weeks. So some of them are on the earlier side at 21 days. Some are about a month. So I would just look at the packaging, and it will usually tell you, how long. They grow really, really fast.
And PJ Myers, who's been to the winery, is wondering how the asparagus is going this season.
Funny that you asked, because I was just noticing it's starting to pop up. So some of the spears are starting to shoot up. I'm going to start cutting them pretty soon, because every single day you start getting them. And if you don't get it one day, the next day it's already going to branch out.
Yeah, I love asparagus season. I saw the Wine Institute posted a really great recipe with a little pistachio pesto and asparagus and goat cheese that I thought would be great with our Sauvignon Blanc yesterday. So check that out on the California Wine Institute website. Thanks so much, Bree. Let's pop over to Chef Todd in the kitchen and see what he's doing with spring vegetables and spring sheep too.
Spring vegetables and spring lamb a little bit. So with everything that Bree is talking about, kind of getting excited and gearing, going from the winter vegetables into the springtime, thinking about those fresh vegetables that are going to be coming through, whether it's your farmer's market out of your own garden. So I thought, keeping with that same kind of theme, I would show off what we had in our particular area here to put together a really nice array of beautiful springtime type of vegetables and prepare them very simply. To go with the elevation, though, knowing that it's a big, robust red wine, I thought I would put some lamb with this. If you happen to be in an area where you have a butcher shop or where lamb is pretty popular, you might be able to find some of the butcher shops that actually will have some spring lamb. So this is a younger lamb. It's going to be more tender. It also is going to be a little less aged or gamey. And if some people are maybe a little bit put off by lamb and how intense it can be at times, the spring lamb is something you might want to give a try. For our vegetables, I basically went through all the estates and looked at our garden that we had here, and I came up with quite a few things that are just starting to pop up. And I went ahead and pre-cooked those by blanching. And blanching is a basic technique where you've got some rapidly boiling water, you've got some salt in there for seasoning, and what you're doing is washing down your vegetables, trim them, maybe bite-sized nice pieces, and then quickly cook them or par cook them, maybe only for anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute, depending on the type of the vegetable and how thick you actually cut them. But what that does is give you a par cooked mixture that you can gently reheat up afterwards. You can make that up ahead of time. So it's really convenient if you have a lot of things going on for your menu or your dishes that you're planning to do for your meal. It's something that's used quite a bit in industry. So professional kitchens do that quite a bit as well. You have to par blanch them, and as soon as they're done, you can taste a little bit as you're going to make sure they don't overcook. You want to leave a little al dente in there, a little crunch, a little freshness, and you just immediately plunge them into an ice bath, which is water and ice, about 50-50. Now, cold temperature going from extreme hot to extreme cold will shock them and keep them from overcooking. It also helps to lock in the color. So very salted water, rapid boil, cook them quickly, shock them into ice water, and as soon as they're done, don't leave them soaking in the water. They'll get a little waterlogged. Go ahead and pick those out and just drain them on some paper towel. Now you're ready to reheat them later on, whether you use butter, olive oil, some fresh herbs. And that's what I'm going to do with today's vegetables that I have set to go with the lamb. Now the recipe also calls for some nice herbs in this. You know, everyone knows that garlic, mint, rosemary, thyme, those are really fantastic flavors that go well with lamb. So what I decided to do is chop some of that up, put it with some extra virgin olive oil. I put a little salt and pepper on that lamb loins that I have, and I basically let them marinate for about 4 to 6 hours. So that's going to give some time for all those wonderful resinous flavors and strong intensity to kind of flavor that lamb that you have. Depending on the type of lamb that you have, whether you get the lamb loin, which is almost essentially the same as like a New York strip of beef would be for lamb, or you could also get the lamb rack. In this case, I found some lamb rack that I took the actual bones off. So I'm going to use the bones for making a stock on the side, and I'm going to use a boneless lamb, essentially like a little ribeye piece here that I'm going to pan roast for this dish. The sauce that's going to go with this is going to be actually a salsa verde, very fresh, lots of fresh green herbs, something that's lighter, again, thinking kind of like springtime. So lots of parsley from our garden, some oregano from our garden, and then some olive oil. Important components to have in here, some tartness and acid. That's going to give it a real brightness. And so I have in there some cornichons, some capers, and also some lemon juice and lemon zest. So that's going to really brighten up some of that herbaceousness that's in there.
And are you using the Meyer lemons for that, Todd? That they're just a little sweeter?
I am because that's what we have. That's the best lemon that I have coming off of our estate right now. And if not, you can use your regular lemons wherever you are. But I know that I've got some really fantastic Meyer lemons, so I'm using those as the zest for the fragrance as well as the juice that goes into it. Let's take a look at what I have set up here.
Okay, and Todd, can you share a little bit about how to choose that lamb? Because you know me, that's not in my department on what I should be looking for.
Absolutely. So there are all different types of lamb that you can get, whether it's a domestic U.S. like Colorado lamb. It tends to be a much larger eye. The animals actually grow a little bit bigger and the diet is different. So you can get a U.S. product if you wanted to. There are very strong markets in Australia as well as New Zealand, and their lamb are a little bit smaller typically. So you might find that the eye, like in this case here, the bones were removed from this one. This one happens to be a New Zealand one. And so it's smaller, it's a little bit more mild in flavor, if that happens to be your preference. And you could always do, maybe have a fun experimentation, do your own tasting, as well as tasting a lot of our wine side by side. Maybe have a lamb tasting if you're really into it. It'd be really interesting to have maybe a rack from New Zealand, a rack from Australia, and something from the US. And you'll be able to see the difference in the meatiness, the texture of the meat itself, how fat they are, how much fattiness they have on them. But the varying flavors are going to change according, just like wines change with the different terroir in the area. So whatever the diet is, if they're grass-fed exclusively, if it's finished on grain, however it may be, that's where you're going to find some differences there. But essentially, for the most part, when you find the lamb, it's going to have that beautiful color to it. You're going to have maybe a little bit of fat cap on there. If you are a little thrown out by some of the intensity or strength of lamb, you can always trim or take off all of that fat. You'll notice that I clean these down pretty well, so it doesn't have any of that excess fat on there, because it is going with a lot of these wonderful spring vegetables. So I really want those to show through as well. So this one has the marinade on it already. This is about a half of a rack, beautiful loin. It's a tender cut that I'm just going to sear in the pan. If I need to, based on the thickness, I can go into an oven to finish the cooking process, maybe for another 5 minutes or so, something really simple like that. And I like to serve it anywhere from medium rare to medium. A lot of people like it rare, and that's fine. So you just have to use maybe an internal temperature gauge, whether you use your Insta-Read thermometer like this, or I'm sure you've probably seen me before utilizing our digital read thermometer, where you can insert the probe in and see what the internal temperature is, so that you can remove it anywhere from 118 degrees, 125 degrees, anywhere from rare to medium.
I think, because we talk about my favorite kitchen tool, that thermometer, so often, we need to have a recipe competition, like a week or Instagram competition, to win one of those every week for a month or something, because it's just the best tool.
That would be fun. And it is a great tool. It's a great thing to keep around. It's one of those, hopefully, doneness guarantees, something that will help so that you don't get distracted. I'm going to go ahead and start this lamb off and get it searing. Understand that I already seasoned it up ahead of time. It does have rosemary, thyme, and mint, as long as some garlic and also some black pepper and salt on there. So I'm going to go ahead and start pan searing it over not too high of an intense heat. If you actually have lamb loin, it's going to be a little bit thinner on the strength of it. Now, I did try to remove the majority of the oil on there so it doesn't flare up. Also, as well as some of the solids. You don't want all of the solids on there because there's a good chance that they might burn. So by taking them and just searing it, maybe over about medium temperature, to get a nice, beautiful brown. That's where a lot of the flavor development is going to come in. I think that's going to play really well with the Elevation, being Cabernet based with the Malbec in there. I think that will work really well. So I'm going to go ahead and let that kind of sear. I can check my internal temperature on it once I've gotten it flipped over and I've gone to all 4 sides. Don't be in any huge aggressive hurry to cook it over too high of temperature, because it might just sear too dark on the outside and get a little aggressive on the herbs and the garlic that were on there. So you want it to cook nice and evenly on the inside as well. So if you do need to, you may want to have your oven on at 350 degrees to finish off. Now the Salsa Verde I make up ahead of time. This is great because you can utilize any of your fresh herbs. So it's chopped parsley. I have some oregano from the garden. I even put in a little bit of the green tops from the spring onion that I have. Here's a beautiful spring onion. And then I also put in some cornichon, some capers. I also have the lemon zest and lemon juice. There's garlic and shallots in here. So it's kind of savory, but it has rich olive oil. The fattiness in there will be wonderful, the oil. Go ahead and give this a little flip. Wonderful color on there.
Oh, yeah. Looking good, Chef.
And then the nice part about this, here's some of the other vegetables. If I can point them out to you. If you've never had these before, they're a lot of fun. This is a Jerusalem artichoke, also called sunchoke. Kind of a knobby tuber type of a vegetable. It's really crunchy, slightly starchy on the inside. Wonderful. It's very thin skin. If you scrub it well with a brush and cold water, you can basically just leave the skin on. So it's almost like a potato in that sense where the skin is edible. Beautiful carrot from our garden I pulled out earlier. Here's some leek. Here's some beautiful golden sweet snap peas that are starting to pop out of our garden. And also here's some fingerling potatoes that I thought I would put in there. And so those are just the variety that I have. Yours can change accordingly. Also during the springtime, you might find that there's some green beans. I happen to cut them down to small bite size. I have some of the leeks that I par blanched off. Remember, all of these have been cooked. So all I need to do is really reheat them in a pan for maybe about 20 seconds or so. That's it. It's going to be a fairly quick process. So here's some kohlrabi.
Okay.
There's some fennel. Here's some of my sunchokes. Here's some artichoke. I also have some of the spring onion that I chopped up there. I'm going to use that to begin the saute on the vegetables to reheat them. And here's a couple different colors of carrots. And I kind of just cut them down into like bite-sized pieces. So that'll be almost like the vegetable mix, the springtime, something that's representing the jardiniere or the printaniere, the springtime, primavera type feel when all the spring vegetables start to come around. It gets really exciting from a chef standpoint in the kitchen. I'm going to go ahead and actually put this lamb rack into the oven just to finish it off.
And Todd, any tips if we're doing this without the lamb for our vegetarian friends?
Oh, sure. So obviously you can go really heavy on the vegetables. I like the flavoring with the Salsa Verde on there. You know me, I'm always thinking about what other kind of meaty, hearty kind of substitute could you do. Here's roasted mushrooms that I have. So here's some maitake mushrooms and some trumpet royales, olive oil, garlic, some fresh herbs on there as well. So that's a great substitute. You won't feel like you're missing the meat or the weight of the dish because now you've added an incredible amount of mouthfeel and also some umami to it. So I think that works well with the elevation.
Oh, great.
And it plays well with the Salsa Verde as well. That earthiness and the mushroom umami going with the acid and that freshness that you have there in the vegetables. So
I knew I could count on you for a veggie dish.
Of course. Of course. And just because it's vegetables doesn't mean that it should scare you away from enjoying our wines, that's for sure. I want to enjoy it. So now what I'm going to do is basically just reheat these vegetables as they were par blanched, and you can bite each one of them as you're cooking them to make sure that they're just right doneness. Now all you need to do is basically heat up a little bit of olive oil in the pan. I do have a touch of garlic left from my marinade prior to marinating the lamb. So I'm going to put the garlic in as well as some of my spring onions that are chopped up. So we'll go with just a little bit. And this doesn't need to be extremely hot temperature again because you don't want everything to necessarily caramelize, but you do want it to kind of warm through. And so since these chopped spring onions and the garlic were raw and they were not blanched, I'm going to start off with those in the pan. It's going to be a great foundation in there. You've got some olive oil. Now it's developing that wonderful flavor and aroma. And then from here, once I see it just barely start to turn a little bit of color, I'm going to go ahead and add in the vegetables. So now from here, give it a little stir. And again, the temperature not aggressive, not caramelizing, not getting too dark, kind of letting the natural goodness of each vegetable shine through.
Todd, Lynn has a question for oven roasting the mushrooms. Do you pan sear them first in oil, then pop in the oven, or oven start to finish?
You are onto my method. Yes, that's what I do. I always start with a hot pan on the stovetop to encourage the hot temperature roasting, and then I pop them into the oven after they started in the pan.
Perfect. Well, you make the very best mushrooms, so that's a good tip. Thanks for asking, Lynn. That's no wonder I'm not getting it right.
Yeah, if you're going to a cold, an oven from cold without any heat in the pan, then it kind of slows down the whole process, and they will tend to kind of just steam out as opposed to kind of immediately starting that roasting and the browning that we're looking for when we do that high temperature roasting. So just a pinch of black pepper that I put in here, as well as a little bit of salt. And then all you have to do is kind of warm it through. Now your lamb is either already out and resting. You know that through my Zoom oven that I have, I'm able to pre-cook some of the lamb ahead of time. And so what I want to do is show you just kind of the idea of plating up. So my vegetables are good there. I'm going to go ahead and let them sit and rest. I shut off the heat. Here's my lamb loin now from the rack. Beautiful color on the outside. I did temp it with my digital thermometer. I've had it resting nice off to the side.
And what temp did you cook it to?
I took this one up to about 120.
And then resting for how long?
And then resting for a few minutes just to be able to have it all set for this demo purposes. But you want to have it rest for probably close to, I would say maybe about 5-6 minutes.
Okay.
After it comes out of the oven, because your oven temperature will probably be at about 350 degrees, right? So it shouldn't be too extremely hot where you have to let it rest for an even longer period of time.
Okay.
Show off these beautiful spring vegetables, a lot of different shapes. Textures are nice. It's got a little bit of that garlic and the spring onion flavor that you can smell in there and taste. Nice part is your sauce is basically already done. Here's your lamb. And then we can finish with some of our salsa verde. The nice part about this is even though you've got salt and seasoning all the way through, which is what you should do, there's a nice bit of zip of acid in here. And I'm just going to basically go off to one side so it can kind of run down as opposed to covering up the whole lamb.
Beautiful.
Put a little bit more on the
Pretty.
plate. Olive oil, the richness, the mouthfeel, the fresh herbs in there with that acid. If you wanted to, and you've seen my red Cabernet infused sea salt, you can use a little bit of that onto the plate as well. Maybe just for a little bit for garnish, just in case you want to touch more salt in there. But also, if you wanted to, and you taste the wine, you go to a bite of the food and you find that maybe you want to experiment a little bit, or you want to see if you can make the dish kind of all come together again, you could do just a little more squeeze of lemon right over the top there. Even though there's lemon, once you have the dish all together and you taste that lamb itself and how strong it is, how fatty it may or may not be, you might find that you want to put maybe just a little bit more salt and just a little bit more acid. Because what that will do is soften the perception of the tannins that you have there. So that's a nice thing that you can adjust on your own to kind of perfect your own pairing there by watching, especially with robust red wines like Elevation. You can actually kind of temper some of those aggressive tannins that you might have. Ours are pretty good as far as the tannin structure. But if you wanted to, you could always put just a touch more salt and a touch more acid into the dish. And what you will find is that it may, to you, bring out more fruitiness, more of the softer textures. It'll kind of allow the tannins to tame down, or the perception of taming down, and allow all the wonderful fruit and all those other characteristics to come through. Playing with a few garnishes from some of the edible flowers and the time of the year right now that we have. Hopefully, if you give this one a try and try it with our Elevation with the lamb and all of those wonderful springtime vegetables, hopefully you give that a try and enjoy it.
Well, that looks absolutely amazing as always, Chef. But do tell us if there's any other tips or things we need to purchase for next week for your recipe. Any like insider notes or items we should add for next week?
Sure. We have a fun, kind of simple presentation, again, talking about things that are coming straight out of the garden. We've got some beautiful spring carrots that are going to be coming out. So I thought I would do a nice presentation featuring carrots along with some yogurt. And then the interesting sprinkle garnish I have made myself already a few times and utilized it in the kitchen here. But I also have a recipe posted for it. It's a spice mixture, a nut and spice mixture called dukkha. So it's an Egyptian spice mixture that has toasted nuts and spices in there. And it's really flavorful. It's got great texture to it. If you want to try to make that on your own and buy out some of the ingredients, you can follow my recipe that I have on the website. Otherwise, you can take a look at some of the grocery stores. It's becoming very popular now. So you might be able to find it in some specialty spice shops or some gourmet grocery outlets that you might find where you find dukkha, D-U-K-K-A-H. If you can find that, I think you'll enjoy it.
Awesome. And Todd, just a quick question from Andy. What were the flowers that you used? It looked like a little rosemary and maybe some mustard, but.
Exactly. So some rosemary we have blooming like crazy right now on our estate, as well as the mustard coming from the center cover crop, the beautiful photo opportunity that everyone is pulling over on the side who's coming through the valley, taking some fantastic seasonal pictures. It always comes around this time of the year as cover crop down the vines in between in the aisles there. And otherwise, I put in some fresh mint little sprigs there too, because we've got all that growing here on our estate.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the excellent tips, particularly the mushrooms. And if I'm going to go buy lamb, I now know actually how to do that, which is a good tip for me. Make my husband happy if I can cook a piece of lamb properly. So thank you all so much for coming and joining us again for My Wine, My Garden this week. Remember, if you're buying your wine locally and you didn't get your seeds, shoot us a note and we'll get those out to you, and any other materials that go with the tastings, the recipes, etc. So we love you to support your local retailers purchasing your wine in your local neighborhood. So please do that, and don't be shy if you need the materials from us. We're happy to send them along and have you join in from anywhere. So thanks so much. We'll see you next Thursday. It was delightful. I missed you all last week. And until next week, be well, be kind. Cheers.
Cheers.